The crack of a rifle echoed across Hawthorne Elite shooting range. A woman in faded jeans and a worn cardigan stood motionless as seasoned professionals gaped in disbelief. Her bullet had struck dead center on a target 1,000 yards away, a shot most military snipers would struggle to make. Commander Jackson Briggs. The range owner whose decorated military career had spawned countless embellished tales, felt the blood drain from his face. Impossible, he muttered, lowering his high-end spotting scope. The woman, the same woman he'd mockingly told to watch and learn just hours earlier, had executed what shooting insiders called a $1 million shot, and she'd done it with a standard-issue rifle that Briggs had deliberately sabotaged with a misaligned scope. "Would you like me to do it again?" Eleanor Morgan asked quietly, her voice carrying in the stunned silence. The question wasn't a boast. It was a challenge delivered with the calm precision of someone who had been underestimated her entire life. Former Colonel William Daniels, watching from the sidelines, suppressed a knowing smile. He recognized that stance, that breathing pattern, that impossible focus. He'd seen it before. In classified theaters of war, where the shooter known only as Ghost had saved countless American lives with her extraordinary gift. The professionals who had laughed at Eleanor's worn clothes now shifted uncomfortably. They recognized the subtle signs of expertise that transcended their expensive gear. Briggs's complexion had turned from white to red, his humiliation transforming rapidly to rage. "A lucky shot," he announced loudly, his voice strained. Even a blind squirrel finds an acorn occasionally, but everyone present knew what they had witnessed wasn't luck. It was the revelation of extraordinary skill that raised uncomfortable questions. Who exactly was this unassuming woman, and why had she chosen today to reveal herself at this particular shooting range? 7 days earlier, Eleanor Morgan had driven her modest sedan into the exclusive Hawthorne Elite shooting range parking lot. Navigating between luxury SUVs and custom trucks with military decals, the facility, all polished wood and gleaming glass, stood as a monument to the privileged alliance between private wealth and military connections. The receptionist, young, polished, and clearly accustomed to a different clientele, looked up with barely concealed skepticism. "Can I help you?" she asked. Emphasis on the "you" making clear, Eleanor didn't fit the expected profile. "I'd like to register for range time." "Please," Eleanor replied, placing her driver's license on the counter. "I've completed all the necessary safety certifications." Her voice was soft but clear, carrying the quiet confidence of someone stating simple facts rather than making requests. The receptionist's perfectly shaped eyebrows lifted slightly. "Membership at Hawthorne Elite is by invitation only. We don't offer public shooting hours." She slid the license back. "Perhaps the community range in Millfield would be more appropriate for beginners." Before Eleanor could respond, a commanding voice interjected from behind. "Problem here." "Amber?" Commander Jackson Briggs approached, his broad frame clad in tactical pants and a polo embroidered with the Hawthorne logo and his military credentials. "This lady wants range time." "Commander, I was explaining our membership policy," Amber replied, emphasizing lady with subtle condescension. Briggs studied Eleanor with the calculated assessment of a predator, determining if something was worth his attention. "Military background?" he asked, already assuming the negative. "Yes," Eleanor answered simply, offering no elaboration. A subtle smirk crossed his face. "Let me guess, administrative, perhaps medical?" when Eleanor didn't correct him. His assumption solidified. "Look, Mrs. Young, Miss Morgan," she supplied. "Miss Morgan, Hawthorne caters to serious shooters, competitive professionals, active and former special operations personnel. Our members have earned their place here through demonstrated expertise." He gestured toward a group of men laughing near the range entrance. "Their equipment alone worth more than many people's annual salary. I'm sure you understand." Eleanor understood all too well the toxic mix of arrogance and insecurity that drove men like Briggsman, who built fiefdoms where they controlled access and status, where their version of events became unquestionable truth. She had encountered such men throughout her military career. Men who took credit for others' achievements and buried their own failures beneath elaborate mythologies of heroism. "The Hawthorne website mentions community access days," she noted calmly. "Today is listed as one such day." Briggs's expression flickered briefly. His own promotional materials had trapped him. The community days existed purely for tax benefits and local goodwill. Virtually no community members ever attended. Those sessions are fully booked weeks in advance. He recovered smoothly. I registered online 3 weeks ago. Eleanor countered, producing a confirmation email, paid the non-refundable fee as well, for a fraction of a second. Genuine confusion crossed Briggs's face before he masked it. Someone had approved this woman's application, and oversight he would address later. But now he was caught between his public image as Hawthorne's magnanimous founder and his desire to maintain the exclusivity that fueled his business model. Very well. He conceded with a tight smile that never reached his eyes. Amber will process your day pass. Basic lanes only. Of course, as Eleanor completed her paperwork, she became aware of someone watching her, not with the dismissive glances of the other members, but with genuine curiosity. An older man with weathered features observed her from a corner table, his practiced casualness betraying professional assessment. Former military. Eleanor noted automatically, the way he positioned himself with clear sightlines to all exits. The measured economy of his movement habits that never truly disappeared. What Eleanor couldn't have known yet was that this observer, retired Colonel William Daniels, was the one person at Hawthorne who might recognize her true identity. And that recognition would accelerate a confrontation years in the making, a reckoning that would expose not just Briggs's fabricated heroism, but a conspiracy that had claimed lives and poisoned an entire watershed while officials looked the other way. Eleanor was assigned to Lane 15, the least desirable position at the far end of the range. Poorly lit and adjacent to the maintenance area, the message was clear: she was being tolerated, not welcomed. As she set up her modest equipment with practiced efficiency, she became aware of approaching footsteps and muffled laughter. "Gentlemen," Briggs announced to the group following him, "we have a special guest today." His exaggerated courtesy barely masked the mockery beneath. "Miss Morgan here is joining us through our community outreach program." The 5 men with him, all bearing the unmistakable confidence of wealth and status, regarded Eleanor with expressions ranging from amusement to dismissive pity. They represented Hawthorne's elite membership, executives and security contractors who paid premium fees for the prestige and connections Briggs provided. "Perhaps we should give our guest a proper demonstration," suggested Gregory Jenkins, a younger version of Briggs in both appearance and manner. "Show her what real shooting looks like." Briggs smiled indulgently. "An excellent suggestion. Miss Morgan might appreciate seeing what years of professional training produces." Without waiting for her response, they commandeered the adjacent lanes, unpacking custom rifles with ostentatious care. What followed was less a demonstration than a performance, each man taking turns executing moderately difficult shots while providing running commentary on techniques clearly intended to emphasize Eleanor's presumed ignorance. "Notice the proper breathing control," Briggs explained loudly, speaking not to Eleanor but to his audience. "Exhale halfway, hold, squeeze. Don't pull. Something weekend warriors never quite master." The others nodded sagely, exchanging knowing glances that established their shared superiority. Their shots were competent grouping within expected parameters for the relatively modest 200-yard distance they had selected. Professional level shooting. Certainly. But nothing extraordinary. When they finished, Briggs turned to Eleanor with exaggerated courtesy. "Perhaps you'd like to try." "Miss Morgan, no pressure." "Of course." Even hitting the paper would be an achievement for a beginner. Eleanor felt the weight of their collective judgment, the absolute certainty that she would embarrass herself and confirm their biases. For a moment, she considered the satisfaction of proving them wrong immediately, of executing a shot that would shatter their complacency. But revealing her true abilities now would compromise the larger purpose that had brought her to Hawthorne. "I think I'll observe a while longer," she replied quietly. "I appreciate the demonstration." Her restraint was mistaken for intimidation, prompting chuckles from the group. "Wise choice," Briggs said with mock generosity. "Marksmanship takes years to develop. Best to watch and learn before attempting anything ambitious." As they moved away, Eleanor heard Jenkins mutter, "Why do they even bother coming here? It's embarrassing for everyone." From across the range, Colonel Daniels continued his discreet observation, his expression thoughtful as he noted Eleanor's controlled response to the deliberate provocation. Unlike the others, he recognized the precise economy of her movements, the way she scanned the environment, cataloging details most would miss. His suspicions deepened as he watched her finally take her position, deliberately introducing small errors into her stance and gripe errors, no trained shooter would make naturally. When Eleanor fired her first shots, they struck the outer rings of the target, respectable for a beginner, but unimpressive to the professionals who periodically glanced her way. Only Daniels noticed the perfect consistency of those imperfect shots, the statistical impossibility of a novice producing such precisely controlled grouping, even in the outer rings. What appeared to be mediocrity was, to his experienced eye, a masterful performance of calculated restraint. The question was why? Why would a shooter of clearly advanced capability deliberately underperform? What purpose brought her to Hawthorne under this careful disguise of ordinariness? The answer lay buried in classified files and covered-up operations from years earlier, when a sniper known only as Ghost had executed impossible shots in theaters of war, where officially no American troops were present. Ghost's identity had remained classified at the highest levels, the perfect anonymity enabling deniability for operations that could never be acknowledged. But William Daniels had been there for Ghost's final official mission, the extraction gone wrong that had resulted in her supposed death. He had seen the aftermath of her impossible shot that saved his team. And more importantly, he had glimpsed her face when her mask slipped briefly during evacuation. He had never reported that breach of protocol, understanding, even then, that some secrets protected the keeper as much as the mission. Now, watching Eleanor Morgan's deliberate mediocrity at lane 15, Daniels felt the pieces of a puzzle long abandoned click into place. Ghost hadn't died in that remote valley years ago. She had simply disappeared, vanishing into the ordinary world where no one would think to look for a legend. Back in her modest rental cabin on the outskirts of Hawthorne County, Eleanor Morgan spread satellite images across the kitchen table, her disciplined calm momentarily fractured as she stared at the environmental destruction documented in the sequential photographs. The once pristine Clearwater watershed that supplied 3 counties had been systematically poisoned, a toxic plume expanding from the Hawthorne elite property into surrounding groundwater. They built the long-range shooting area directly over the aquifer recharge zone. She murmured to herself, tracing the contamination pattern with a finger. Thousands of rounds containing lead, copper, zinc, antimonial, leaching into the groundwater. 6 months earlier, Eleanor had been living a carefully constructed ordinary life in Vermont, teaching online courses in environmental science, while maintaining the purposeful anonymity she had established after leaving her military career behind. Then came the phone call that shattered her hard-won peace. Her brother Michael, diagnosed with a rare form of cancer typically associated with heavy metal poisoning. Michael's environmental testing company had been hired to assess water quality in Hawthorne County routine work until his samples showed alarming levels of contamination. When he expanded testing to identify the source, he received threats. When he persisted, presenting evidence to county officials, he was fired and publicly discredited. When he continued his investigation independently, he was diagnosed with cancer. The statistical improbability of the timing too great to be coincidence. It was like they knew exactly when to strike and how to silence me. Michael had told her during her last visit. His once robust frame fragile in the hospital bed. Someone made a call, and suddenly my reputation was destroyed. My business ruined. The county health department buried my reports, claimed I fabricated data for attention. Eleanor had recognized the hallmarks of a coordinated operation, the kind of multi-level pressure campaign that required influence across various systems. Who benefits from hiding this contamination, she had asked. Hawthorne Elite Shooting Range sits on the primary source, built by some ex-military guy with powerful friends. The county approved permits despite watershed protection ordinances, gave tax incentives even. The place is untouchable. His voice had weakened, but his eyes remained fierce. People are getting sick. Ellie. Children are showing elevated lead levels. Someone needs to expose what's happening. Now, alone in the rental cabin, Eleanor studied the evidence her brother had compiled before his illness, progressed water sample analyses, property records, permit applications with inconsistencies, county meeting minutes with key sections redacted. The pattern was clear. Systematic corruption, enabling ongoing environmental crimes with full official protection. Her first week of reconnaissance at Hawthorne had confirmed her suspicions. The facility's members-only exclusivity wasn't merely elitism. It was containment controlling who could access the property and potentially discover its secrets. The exaggerated security measures weren't just theatrical displays for wealthy clients. They were barriers preventing outside scrutiny. Most telling was the heavily restricted technical area behind the main, rangy ostensibly for maintenance, but guarded with security measures disproportionate to its stated purpose. Through careful observation, Eleanor had noted regular deliveries entering that aerochemical supplies in quantities far exceeding normal range maintenance needs. A soft knock at the cabin door interrupted her analysis. Instinctively, she swept the documents into a folder, her hand moving toward the concealed sidearm at the small of her back, another habit that had survived her transition to civilian life. Through the peephole, she recognized Colonel William Daniels from the range, his presence both expected and concerning. She had noticed his scrutiny, had suspected he might have recognized her. The question was whether he represented a threat or a potential ally. "Miss Morgan," he greeted her when she opened the door, maintaining a respectful distance that acknowledged the boundaries between them. "Or should I say Lieutenant Morgan? Perhaps you prefer your operational designation Ghost?" Eleanor's expression revealed nothing, though internally she calculated escape routes and response options. "I think you're confusing me with someone else." "Colonel Daniels." He smiled slightly, the expression softening his weathered features. "Your performance today was impressive. Deliberately hitting the outer rings with perfect consistency requires more skill than striking the bullseye. A statistical impossibility for anyone but the shooter I once knew." "What do you want?" she asked directly, neither confirming nor denying his assertion. "The same thing you do," he replied, then lowered his voice. "Justice for your brother, and for the families being poisoned by Briggs' operation." Her surprise must have shown despite her control, because Daniels nodded in confirmation. "Michael Morgan's investigation wasn't as buried as they thought. Some of us have been gathering evidence, but we lack certain capabilities, the kind that someone with your particular skills could provide." "And why should I trust you?" Eleanor asked, still blocking the doorway. "Because I was there the night Ghost supposedly died. I saw what really happened in that valley, how Briggs abandoned his team and fabricated a heroic narrative that built his reputation and this corrupt empire." Daniel's voice hardened with controlled anger. "I've spent 5 years documenting his operation while watching people get sick from water. He's poisoning. But he's protected from above until we can gather conclusive evidence linking him directly to both the contamination and the cover-up." Eleanor studied him with the analytical intensity that had once made her the military's most effective long-range asset. Detecting deception had been as crucial to her survival as marksmanship. After a long moment, she stepped aside, allowing him entry into the cabin. "You have 30 minutes to convince me," she said, closing the door behind him. "Start with what you know about the technical area." The annual Marksmanship Championship at Hawthorne Elite represented the pinnacle of the facility's calendar, drawing competitive shooters from across the region and providing Briggs with his most prominent platform, self-promotion. The event generated significant revenue and publicity, reinforcing both his business model and his carefully constructed public image as a decorated military hero turned successful entrepreneur. 5 days after her initial visit, Eleanor returned to Hawthorne to register for the championship, her deliberate mediocrity during practice sessions having established her as a non-threatening presence, easily dismissed by the regular clientele. The registration desk was staffed by a different attendant, who regarded her with the same barely concealed disdain as his colleague had shown previously. "The championship is for advanced shooters only," he stated flatly after reviewing her request. "Participants must have demonstrated professional-level proficiency during qualifying sessions." "I've completed the required qualifying sessions," Eleanor replied calmly, presenting her range documentation with marked scores, deliberately average but within the minimum threshold for competition eligibility. The attendant frowned at the paperwork, clearly searching for a reason to reject her application. Finding none, he reluctantly began processing her entry when Commander Briggs appeared, his attention caught by the unexpected interaction. "What's happening here, Jenkins?" he asked, immediately tensing upon recognizing Eleanor. "Miss Morgan is registering for the championship, sire," Jenkins explained, his tone conveying his personal opinion of this development. "Her qualifying scores meet the minimum requirements." Briggs' jaw tightened momentarily before his face smoothed into a practiced smile that failed to warm his eyes. "How dedicated of you to pursue this, Miss Morgan." The championship attracts serious competitors, military and law enforcement professionals with years of specialized training. The registration materials state that all qualifying participants are welcome, Eleanor noted. Her voice neutral. A subtle flash of anger crossed Briggs' face before he controlled it. Of course, he agreed with exaggerated courtesy. Hawthorne prides itself on inclusivity within our qualification standards. We'll be delighted to have you participate. Though I should warn you, the competitive environment can be quite intimidating for newcomers. The implied threat hung in the air between them, his smile never reaching his eyes as he added, I've personally designed some of the more challenging scenarios this year. Best of luck. Miss Morgan. As Briggs walked away, Colonel Daniels approached the registration desk, timing his arrival to appear coincidental. Quite a turnout this year, he commented casually to Jenkins, nodding politely to Eleanor, as if acknowledging a stranger. Colonel Daniels. Jenkins replied with the automatic respect Daniels' reputation commanded. Will you be competing again this year? Just observing. Daniels answered. My shooting days are mostly behind me. Though I enjoy watching the next generation. He glanced at the championship schedule displayed on the counter. I see the preliminary round begins tomorrow at 0800. Yes. See ya. We're expecting record participation. Daniels nodded thoughtfully. Should be quite an event? His gaze shifted briefly to Eleanor, communicating silent confirmation of their shared timeline. Their plan was in motion, with the championship providing the perfect opportunity to access the restricted technical area while security was focused on the main event. What neither Eleanor nor Daniels could have anticipated was that Briggs had recognized the subtle shift in dynamics, his instincts honed by years of operations alerting him that something was amiss. The woman's persistence. Daniels' unusual interest in a seemingly unremarkable participant. These details triggered warning signals he couldn't ignore. That evening, Briggs summoned his security chief to his private office overlooking the main range. I want everything we can find on Eleanor Morgan, he instructed, pouring himself 2 fingers of expensive bourbon. Military records, employment history, current associations, particularly any connection to Colonel Daniels. You suspect something specific? Asked the security chief, a former special forces operator who had served under Briggs. Something doesn't add up with this woman. Her shooting is too consistent for a beginner Evan. Her misses follow statistical patterns that suggest deliberate control rather than random error. Briggs swirled the amber liquid in his glass, his expression darkening. And Daniels has been watching her with more than casual interest. Could be nothing, the security chief suggested. Daniels always did have a soft spot for underdogs. Or it could be something, Briggs countered sharply, with the EPA sniffing around and that environmentalist still causing problems from his hospital bed. We can't afford complications. The championship brings media attention. The last thing we need is someone using that spotlight to create problems. He drained his glass, setting it down with deliberate control. Check her vehicle for surveillance equipment, monitor her communications if possible, and pull Daniels' recent activities phone records. Meetings. Anything unusual, that won't be easy. The security chief warned. Daniels still has connections in high places. Briggs' expression hardened, the carefully maintained facade of the successful businessman giving way momentarily to the ruthless operator beneath. So do we? Make it happen. And arrange an equipment inspection for all championship participants. I want her rifle and ammunition thoroughly examined. If she's planning something, we'll find it. What Briggs couldn't know was that Eleanor had anticipated this response, had counted on his paranoia and arrogance to drive predictable countermeasures. His ordered inspection would provide exactly the opportunity she needed to implement the next phase of her plan. The morning of the championship preliminaries dawned clear and crisp, the Hawthorne Elite facility bustling with competitors, officials, and select media invited to document the prestigious event. Security personnel were strategically positioned throughout the property. Though concentrated primarily around the competition areas and VIP sections, where sponsors and local officials would be entertained, Eleanor arrived early, her unremarkable sedan joining the procession of vehicles entering the heavily monitored parking area. She had dressed deliberately for the day, simple, practical attire that would draw no attention but allowed complete freedom of movement. Her competition, rifle and equipment were packed in a standard case, nothing to distinguish her from dozens of other participants preparing for the event. At the mandatory equipment inspection station, she presented her rifle and ammunition for examination, maintaining the quiet, slightly nervous demeanor expected of an amateur in professional surroundings. The inspector, clearly briefed to give her equipment particular scrutiny, dismantled her rifle with methodical precision. examining each component for modifications or irregularities. Standard Remington, 700. He noted with slight surprise. Having clearly expected something more unusual, factory stock. Unmodified trigger assembly. He examined her ammunition with equal care. Finding nothing suspicious in the commercially available match-grade rounds, when he returned the equipment, Eleanor detected the subtle signs of sabotage. Immediately, the sight adjustment screw loosened just enough to shift 0 under recoil. The cheek rest height altered marginally. Amateur tampering that any experienced shooter would notice immediately. But that a supposed novice might miss until performance was affected, she made no corrections. Accepting the rifle with a polite "thank you," while noting which security personnel had been involved in the interference. Each participant in Briggs's conspiracy was being carefully documented, building the comprehensive case that would eventually dismantle his entire operation. The preliminary round consisted of 3 standard courses of fire, designed to eliminate less skilled competitors before the more challenging stages. Eleanor maintained her carefully calibrated performance, demonstrating just enough competence to advance past the first cut while remaining unthreatening to the top-ranked shooters dominated by Briggs's inner circle. Throughout the morning, she noted Colonel Daniels moving systematically through the facility, his presence, as a respected former champion, providing natural cover for his reconnaissance of security positions and personnel rotations. Their plan hinged on precise timing, utilizing the championship events as structured distractions while gathering the evidence needed to connect Briggs directly to both the environmental contamination and the subsequent cover-up. Between competition stages, Eleanor overheard fragments of conversation among local officials present as Briggs's special guests, their casual references to managed test results and regulatory accommodations, providing additional confirmation of the corruption, enabling Hawthorne's continued operation despite mounting evidence of environmental damage. By mid-afternoon, the competitor field had been reduced by half. The advancing participants preparing for the next day's semi-final rounds, Eleanor had qualified near the bottom of the advancing group exactly as planned. Her unremarkable performance had reduced the scrutiny, directed her way, security personnel focusing instead on the high-profile competitors and their expensive equipment. As equipment was being secured for the evening, Eleanor implemented the next phase discreetly, switching her sabotaged scope with an identical replacement concealed in her equipment bag. The modified scope contained microcameras and environmental sensors that would document both the shooting range conditions and the restricted technical area once she gained access. Impressive consistency for someone with limited experience. Observed a quiet voice behind her. Eleanor turned to find Colonel Daniels nearby, apparently examining his own equipment while positioning himself to block direct observation from security cameras. "I try to apply good fundamentals," she replied at normal volume, playing her role for any observers or listening devices. Daniels nodded, then lowered his voice. "Security patterns confirmed. Shift change creates a 7-minute window at 0420. Technical area access requirements as expected." He continued packing his equipment, his movements natural and unhurried. "Your brother's condition has deteriorated. Doctors are giving him days, not weeks." Eleanor's hands stilled momentarily, the first genuine reaction she had allowed herself to display since arriving at Hawthorne. This accelerated timeline changed their operational parameters significantly, reduced the margin for error and preparation. "The semi-finals provide adequate distraction," she responded quietly, resuming her equipment packing. "We move tomorrow as planned." What neither of them had detected was the small listening device planted in Eleanor's rifle case during the inspection, transmitting their exchange directly to Briggs's security team, monitoring communications from a concealed command center beneath the main clubhouse. The pre-dawn darkness at Hawthorne Elite Shooting Range concealed Eleanor's approach to the facility perimeter, her movements silent and deliberate as she navigated between security patrols with practiced precision. The championship semi-finals scheduled for later that morning had created the perfect operational window. Security personnel focused on preparation for the influx of competitors and spectators rather than potential infiltration. These quiet hours, Eleanor wore dark tactical clothing that allowed complete freedom of movement while minimizing her visible profile. A small backpack contained specialized equipment for documenting and collecting the evidence needed to connect Briggs directly to the environmental crimes destroying Hawthorne County's water supply. Most critically, she carried sampling equipment that would detect and quantify the chemical compounds her brother had identified before his illness forced him to abandon his investigation. Colonel Daniels had provided detailed intelligence on the facility's security systems, the patrol routes, camera positions, and access protocols that protected the restricted technical area from unauthorized observation. His years of cultivating relationships with Hawthorne's staff had yielded comprehensive understanding of the operation's vulnerabilities. What neither Eleanor nor Daniels had fully anticipated was Briggs's level of preparation for this exact scenario. The security chief had implemented countermeasures beyond standard protocol's additional motion sensors, placed at irregular intervals. Infrared detection equipment borrowed from military contacts, and most concerning, armed personnel positioned outside normal patrol patterns. Eleanor detected the first sign of this enhanced security when a camouflage sensor triggered silently as she passed its activation, visible only through her specialized night vision equipment. She froze instantly, becoming part of the landscape as she reassessed her approach. This was military-grade equipment, not standard commercial security technology. Briggs was deploying assets beyond what any legitimate shooting facility would require. Adapting her route to avoid the newly identified threats, Eleanor approached the technical area from an unexpected angle, using the building's architectural features to create access points where security coverage was minimized. Years of operational experience guided her movements, each step placed deliberately, each pause precisely timed between camera sweeps. When she finally reached the technical area's access door, she examined the security panel with practiced efficiency. The locking mechanism was sophisticated military-grade system, requiring both biometric verification and coded entry. Bypassing it would trigger immediate alerts. Instead of attempting direct override, Eleanor implemented an alternative approach, attaching a specialized device to the panel that would capture the next authorized entry sequence. With the championship preparations accelerating, the facility staff would be accessing this area regularly throughout the early morning hours. Patience would yield results without triggering security protocols. 27 minutes into her operation, the access door opened from within a maintenance worker, emerging briefly before securing the entrance behind him. The capture device recorded the entry sequence successfully, providing Eleanor with temporary access capability that would bypass most security alerts. Once inside, she moved with focused efficiency, documenting the extensive chemical processing operation concealed within the building's innocuous exterior. What Briggs presented publicly as a simple maintenance facility was in reality an industrial-scale lead reclamation operation, recovering valuable metals from spent ammunition while dumping toxic byproducts directly into the watershed. Eleanor photographed the illegal discharge system, collected water and soil samples from critical points, and documented the altered county permits that had enabled the operation to function without regulatory oversight. Most damning were the financial records visible on an unsecured terminal showing systematic payments to local officials responsible for environmental enforcement. As she completed her evidence collection, Eleanor detected a subtle shift in the building's ambient sound. Security personnel approaching with deliberate stealth rather than routine patrol patterns. Briggs had anticipated her infiltration, had positioned response teams to intercept her once sufficient evidence of trespassing had accumulated. Rather than attempting immediate extraction, Eleanor implemented her contingency plan, concealing the collected evidence within pre-positioned equipment that would be removed during normal championship operations. She then positioned herself strategically, allowing the security team to detect her presence while maintaining multiple escape options. The confrontation, when it came, followed predictable parameters. Armed security personnel entering with excessive confidence, believing their numerical advantage decisive against a single intruder. Freeze, hands where we can see them. The security team leader's command echoed in the confined space as spotlights illuminated Eleanor's position. She complied immediately, presenting the non-threatening appearance expected of someone caught in unauthorized access. There seems to be some misunderstanding, she stated calmly. Maintaining the civilian persona she had established at the range, the security leader approached cautiously, weapon trained on her with professional discipline. No misunderstanding. Miss Morgan, Commander Briggs would like to discuss your unusual interest in our facility operations. I got turned around looking for the competitor preparation area, she explained with deliberate unconvincingness. The door was unlocked. The security team exchanged knowing glances, clearly interpreting her weak cover story as confirmation of amateur espionage rather than professional infiltration. This perception worked to her advantage, their operational protocols adjusting to contain what they perceived as minimal threat rather than engaging with maximum force. Commander Briggs is very interested in your explanation. The leader responded with the satisfaction of someone who has successfully completed an assignment. He's waiting to speak with you personally. The championship arena at Hawthorne Elite buzzed with anticipation as competitors made final preparations for the semi-final round. Local officials, sponsors, and select media representatives occupied the VIP section, overlooking the primary firing range, where the most challenging stages would test the limits of marksmanship under progressively difficult conditions. Eleanor moved through the competitor preparation area with quiet focus, aware of the surveillance maintained by Briggs' security personnel. Her equipment had been returned as promised, though with evidence of thorough examination and subtle sabotage, the scope's adjustment mechanisms altered, firing pin tension modified, and ammunition selectively compromised. She made no corrections to these deliberate impairments, proceeding with competition preparations as if unaware of the interference. This apparent vulnerability reinforced Briggs' confidence, confirmed his belief that he had successfully contained whatever threat she might have represented. Colonel Daniels maintained his position among the official observers, his presence unremarkable given his historical connection to the event. His careful positioning provided optimal sightlines to both the competition areas and the administrative section, where evidence would be transferred to federal officials once the operation concluded. The competition format progressed through increasingly challenging, stage-eliminating competitors until only the most skilled remained for the final round. Eleanor performed precisely as expected, demonstrating competence sufficient to advance past initial stages while maintaining the appearance of a skilled amateur rather than professional operator. Briggs watched from his privileged position among the competition officials, his initial tension gradually subsiding as Eleanor's performance matched his expectations. The sabotaged equipment functioned predictably, ensuring her results remained unthreatening to the top competitors dominated by his inner circle. The semi-final stage introduced environmental challenges, variable winds, changing light conditions, and extended distances that pushed competitors beyond standard marksmanship into the realm of ballistic calculation and environmental reading. Here, Eleanor allowed a more accurate representation of her capabilities, compensating for equipment limitations through technique rather than equipment quality. Her performance drew attention from more experienced observers, consistency of her adjustments and adaptation to changing conditions, revealing a level of understanding beyond her previously demonstrated skills. Colonel Daniels noted the subtle shift in perception among the professional shooters, who began watching her with more careful assessment rather than dismissive glances. The final elimination stage before the championship round featured the most demanding challenge yet, a 1,000-yard shot requiring perfect adjustment for wind, elevation, temperature, and barometric pressure. Competitors were allowed 3 attempts, with only the highest-scoring shooters advancing to the final round. Eleanor approached her assigned position with focused calm, aware that Briggs had positioned himself nearby to observe her performance directly, his presence intended to intimidate rather than evaluate. The sabotaged scope would make accurate sighting nearly impossible at this distance, the compromised ammunition introducing additional variables beyond normal competition parameters, taking position behind her rifle. Eleanor implemented the visualization techniques that had defined her military career, the complete mental focus that allowed her to transcend equipment limitations through perfect understanding of ballistic principles and environmental plastic factors. Her first shot struck the outer ring of the target, a respectable result given the distance and conditions, but unremarkable among the professional competitors. Briggs' satisfaction was evident in his slight nod to the security chief observing nearby. Eleanor's second shot struck marginally closer to center, showing improvement but remaining non-threatening to the leader's positions. Briggs began moving away, confident the situation was contained as expected. For her final shot, Eleanor implemented a complete reset of her approach, adjusting position subtly, modifying breathing pattern, and shifting focus to a state of heightened perception that few human beings could achieve. In this altered state of awareness, she could detect minute variations in air movement, compensate for equipment irregularities, and calculate trajectories with mathematical precision. When she squeezed the trigger, the rifle's report seemed to hang in the air longer than physically possible, time itself slowing in the space between firing and impact. The shot struck dead center of the target at 1,000 yards, a perfect bullseye that would have been remarkable with optimal equipment and conditions. With sabotaged equipment and deliberately challenging environmental factors, it was virtually impossible. Complete silence fell over the competition area as observers processed what they had witnessed. The scoreboard confirmed what seemed incredible: a perfect score at maximum distance from the competitor Briggs had dismissed as inconsequential. Eleanor rose from her position with quiet composure. Turning to face Briggs directly for the first time since their morning confrontation, his expression had transformed from confidence to barely concealed alarm recognition, dawning that the woman he had threatened and attempted to manipulate possessed capabilities far beyond what he had calculated. "Impossible," he stated flatly, loud enough for nearby competitors to hear. "The equipment must be illegally modified. I demand immediate inspection." "Of course," Eleanor agreed with calm assurance. "A complete examination of all equipment seems appropriate at this stage." Her ready compliance increased his visible discomfort and expected cooperation, suggesting confidence rather than concern. When competition officials conducted their inspection, they found nothing illegal or non-regulation in her equipment, though they noted the inconsistent scope alignment and other irregularities that should have made her perfect shot impossible rather than suspicious. "Would you like me to make the shot again?" Eleanor asked quietly. The simple question penetrating the growing tension surrounding the inspection. Before Briggs could respond, Colonel Daniels approached, his military authority evident in his bearing despite civilian attire. "I believe that would settle any questions," he suggested, addressing the competition officials rather than Briggs directly, perhaps with Commander Briggs' own rifle, to eliminate any equipment variables. The murmur that spread through the gathered competitors and spectators confirmed the significance of this challenge. Using Briggs' personal equipment would eliminate any question of technical advantage or modification. Trapped by the public nature of the confrontation and his own accusations, Briggs had no choice but to acquiesce as carefully maintained control of the situation eroding with each moment. "Fine," he agreed with forced confidence. "My equipment is certainly regulation standard. Let's settle this definitively." As competitors, officials, and spectators gathered in unprecedented focus, Eleanor prepared to execute the verification shot, using Briggs' personal rifle precision instrument worth more than many people's annual salary. Maintained with obsessive attention to detail, the target was positioned at the same 1,000-yard distance, a small circle, barely visible to the naked eye, across the equivalent of 10 football fields laid end to end. At this range, countless variables affected accuracy: wind speed at multiple elevations, barometric pressure, temperature gradients, the Earth's rotation, even the shooter's heartbeat and breathing pattern. Eleanor's preparation was methodical and unhurried, her movements displaying neither the hesitation of uncertainty nor the flamboyance of showmanship. Each adjustment reflected perfect understanding of ballistic principles. Each calculation performed with computer-like precision, enhanced by human judgment developed through thousands of hours of practical application. The range fell silent as Eleanor settled into final position, her breathing pattern establishing the rhythm that would create the microsecond of perfect stability required for a shot at this distance. When she squeezed the trigger, the report echoed across the facility, a single, decisive sound that seemed to hang in the air longer than physically possible. Through high-powered spotting scopes, officials confirmed what seemed statistically impossible: another perfect center hit at 1,000 yards. Executed with unfamiliar equipment after minimal preparation. Not a lucky shot, but the demonstration of extraordinary capability that defined the highest levels of professional marksmanship. The silence that followed was profound, the kind of collective speechlessness that acknowledges witnessed mastery beyond debate or question. Even Briggs' most loyal supporters exchanged glances of reluctant recognition. This level of skill could not be dismissed or explained away through equipment accusations. "Would you like me to do it again?" Eleanor asked quietly, the simple question carrying clearly in the stunned silence. Before Briggs could respond, Colonel Daniels stepped forward, addressing the competition officials and gathered spectators rather than Briggs directly. "I believe proper introductions are overdue," he stated, his authoritative voice commanding immediate attention. Eleanor Morgan served as the primary technical expert for the Advanced Distance Marksmanship Unit, implementing protocols that revolutionized long-range accuracy for specialized operations. He paused, allowing this information to register. Her ballistic calculations and environmental compensation methodologies are taught at every advanced military shooting school in the country, though few instructors have ever met the woman behind the technical manuals. This revelation sent a ripple of murmurs through the professional shooters present, many of whom had indeed studied these principles without knowing their originator's identity. The disclosure shifted perception immediately, recontextualizing Eleanor from anomalous amateur to unrecognized pioneer whose work had shaped their own training. Briggs's expression darkened as he recognized the strategic demolition of his narrative, his dismissive treatment of Eleanor, now revealed as profound misjudgment rather than justified authority. "This changes nothing about this morning's security breach," he countered, attempting to regain control of the situation. "Unauthorized access to restricted areas remains a serious violation regardless of shooting credentials. Indeed, security matters should be addressed properly." Daniels agreed with deceptive cordiality. "Which is why federal environmental protection officials are currently executing a warranted inspection of your technical area, the chemical processing facility you've concealed behind shooting range operations for years." The calculated reveal of this information struck Briggs, visibly his complexion paling as he processed the implications. His security chief stepped forward, a hand moving toward his concealed weapon, until he registered the multiple law enforcement officers who had materialized among the spectators. Their badges now visible as they moved to strategic positions. "The evidence, Miss Morgan gathered, confirms what her brother documented before his illness," Daniels continued, addressing the stunned audience rather than Briggs directly. "Systematic contamination of groundwater with lead, antimony, and processing chemicals resulting in elevated cancer rates throughout communities downstream from this facility." Local officials in the VIP section shifted uncomfortably, several attempting discreet exits, only to find their movements intercepted by federal agents strategically positioned for exactly this response. The coordinated operation had anticipated not just Briggs' reactions, but those of his co-conspirators throughout local government and regulatory agencies. "This is absurd," Briggs protested, his composure fracturing visibly as his carefully constructed reality collapsed around him. "We maintain strict environmental compliance. All operations are permitted and regularly inspected by officials whose children received scholarship funds from your foundation," Eleanor stated, speaking publicly for the first time beyond competition interactions. "Officials who subsequently approved permit modifications allowing industrial-scale chemical processing in a watershed protection zone." Presented with this specific accusation details that could only be known through access to private financial records, several officials in the VIP section abandoned all pretense of confidence, their expressions confirming guilt more effectively than any documented evidence. "My brother identified the contamination source months ago," Eleanor continued, her quiet voice carrying moral authority that commanded attention. "When he presented evidence to county officials, his business was systematically destroyed through coordinated action. When he continued investigating independently, he was diagnosed with the same cancer affecting children in communities drinking contaminated water." 6 months after the dramatic events at Hawthorne Elite Shooting Range, Eleanor Morgan stood at her brother Michael's graveside, autumn leaves drifting gently across the recently installed headstone. Though the evidence she had gathered had brought accountability to those responsible for the environmental contamination, justice had come too late for Michael himself. His cancer, advanced beyond treatment by the time Briggs' operation was exposed, had claimed his life 3 weeks after the championship. "He would be proud of what you've accomplished," observed Colonel Daniels, who had joined her for this private moment of remembrance. "The remediation efforts are showing promising results. Lead levels in the watershed have decreased significantly."